Welcome back to the Vybrational Stage Podcast. Today I want to talk about something that many successful professionals experience but rarely discuss openly. Not because it's secret, not because it's embarrassing, but because it has become so normalized that it simply feels like reality. The feeling that somehow everything depends on you. The team depends on you. The organization depends on you. The family depends on you. The clients depend on you. The future depends on you. And because so much depends on you, your mind never truly disengages. Even when you're at home. Even when you're on vacation. Even when you're lying in bed. Even when the immediate problem has been solved. Part of you remains on duty, scanning, assessing, anticipating, preparing. Most executives assume that this is simply the price of leadership, the cost of responsibility, the burden of success. But what if that's not what's happening at all? What if the exhaustion isn't coming from your responsibilities? What if it's coming from your relationship to them? Because there is a profound difference between carrying responsibility and becoming identified with it. And that distinction may explain why so many high-performing people find themselves feeling overwhelmed despite accomplishing more than ever before. The expansion of responsibility. Responsibility has an interesting characteristic. It expands. Rarely does it stay contained. A new project becomes multiple projects. A new role becomes multiple expectations. A new opportunity becomes multiple obligations. The larger your capacity becomes, the more responsibility tends to find its way toward you. That happens because capable people attract responsibility. People trust them, depend on them, seek them out, ask for their input, assign them additional authority. And for a while, this feels rewarding. It feels like growth. It feels like influence. It feels like progress. Until one day something changes. You realize you're carrying far more than your original job description, far more than your original role, far more than your original intentions. You are carrying the emotional burden of outcome, the pressure of expectations, the weight of future possibilities, the consequence of decisions that have not yet been made. And perhaps most significantly, the belief that if you don't carry it, nobody will. That belief quietly becomes one of the most exhausting forces in a person's life. The identity shift nobody notices. Most people believe responsibility is something they have. Very few realize it can become who they are. This transformation is subtle. At first, you simply are a person who solves problems. Then you're known as a problem solver. Eventually, you become the person who always figures things out. At first, you're simply reliable. Then you're known for reliability. Eventually, reliability becomes part of your identity. At first, you simply are helping. Then helping becomes expected. Eventually, helping becomes who you believe you are. Without realizing it, many professionals stop relating to responsibility as function. They begin relating to it as an identity. And identities are much harder to put down than responsibilities. A task can be completed. A role can change. A project can end. But identity fights to survive. Which is why so many people struggle to rest. Not because they don't need rest, but because rest threatens the identity they've spent decades building. The hidden executive bargain. There's another layer that deserves our attention, a layer that most people never consciously see. At some point in life, many of us make an unconscious bargain. The bargain sounds something like this. If I carry enough responsibility, I will be valuable. If I achieve enough, I will be secure. If I contribute enough, I will finally feel worthy. If I solve enough problems, I will finally be good enough. Notice how subtle that is. The mind quietly turns responsibility into a pathway towards self-worth. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but gradually. And the problem is that this bargaining never actually pays out, because no amount of responsibility can permanently establish your worth. No amount of achievement can permanently establish your value. No amount of success can permanently eliminate insecurity. The finish line keeps moving. The target keeps shifting. The standard keeps rising. And the person carrying it all becomes increasingly exhausted. Not because they're failing, because they are chasing something that responsibility was never designed to provide. Why high performers struggle with stillness. This is one of the most fascinating observations I've encountered. Many people say they want peace, yet when peace becomes available, they become uncomfortable. Many people say they want downtime, yet when downtime arrives, they become restless. Many people say they want freedom, yet when freedom appears, they feel uneasy. Why? Because stillness removes the mechanisms through which identity reinforces itself. When you're solving problems, you know who you are. When you're leading initiatives, you know who you are. When you're carrying responsibilities, you know who you are. But what happens when none of that is occurring? Who are you then? That question is far more unsettling than most people realize, because underneath the activity often sits a fear. Not a fear of failure, a fear of emptiness. A fear that without the responsibilities, the achievements, and the pressure, there would be nothing meaningful left. This is why so many executives unknowingly remain trapped in cycles of perpetual activity. The activity itself has become a source of identity. The exhaustion beneath burnout. Most discussions about burnout focus on workload, hours worked, tasks completed, deadlines managed. But I think there's another form of exhaustion that receives far less attention. Identity exhaustion. The exhaustion that comes from maintaining a version of yourself that feels responsible for everything. The exhaustion of constantly managing, constantly anticipating, constantly protecting, constantly carrying. Not because anyone is requiring it, but because your internal operating system no longer knows another way to function. This is the exhaustion many people feel but cannot explain. They take time off. The exhaustion remains. They complete the project. The exhaustion remains. They solve the problem. The exhaustion remains. Because the source was never the project. The source was the identity carrying the project. What remains when the pressure stops? This brings us to perhaps the most important question of today's conversation. What remains when the pressure stops? Not hypothetically, not intellectually, experientially. Who are you without the title, without the role, without the responsibilities, without the pressure, without the endless list of things demanding your attention? Most people spend their lives answering those questions with thought. But there's another possibility, to stop answering them and start noticing. Because something has been present throughout every chapter of your life. Before the promotion, before the success, before the setbacks, before the responsibilities, before the pressure, there is an awareness that has witnessed every role you've ever played, every success, every failure, every season, every identity. And unlike the roles, the awareness has never been burdened. It has never been overwhelmed. It has never needed proving. It has never needed validating. It has simply been present, quietly, consistently, unchanged beneath all the changing circumstances of life. Closing reflection. Perhaps the deepest insight is this. The goal is not to become less responsible. The goal is to stop measuring your value by how much responsibility you carry. Because responsibility is a function. It is not an identity. Leadership is a role. It is not who you are. Achievement is an experience. It's not who you are. And the moment we begin separating ourselves from the roles we play, something extraordinary becomes possible. We can still lead, still contribute, still serve, still create, but we no longer need those things to tell us who we are. And perhaps that is where real freedom begins. Not when responsibilities disappear, but when the responsibility stops being the source of our identity. Until next time, my friends, be well, and remember, just because you can carry something doesn't mean it belongs on your shoulders. Today's Vibe Shift blog experience. This week we've explored two different expressions of the same challenge. In the Vibe Shift podcast, we explored what happens when our attention becomes fragmented and everything begins to feel equally important. When every task feels urgent, every request feels necessary, every decision carries weight, clarity begins to disappear. Here on the Vibrational Stage Podcast, we've explored the deeper pattern beneath that experience, the tendency to feel responsible for everything. Not simply responsible for our own work, but responsible for outcomes, responsible for other people's experiences, responsible for preventing problems before they occur, responsible for carrying pressures that may never have belonged to us in the first place. And when responsibility becomes identity, something profound begins to happen. We stop asking whether something deserves our attention, we simply assume it deserves our responsibility. Today's Vibe Shift blog experience. This week we've explored two different expressions of the same challenge. In the Vibe Shift podcast, we explored what happens when our attention becomes fragmented and everything begins to feel equally important. When every request feels urgent, every priority competes for our attention, and decision fatigue starts to cloud our judgment. We lose sight of what truly matters. Here on the Vibrational Stage Podcast, we've explored the deeper pattern underneath that experience. The feeling that somehow everything is our responsibility. The pressure to carry more, to manage more, to solve more, to protect more, to become the person who makes sure everything holds together. And over time, responsibility can quietly shift from a leadership function into a personal identity. This week's Vibe Shift blog brings these two conversations together and explores why so many high-performing professionals find themselves trapped between competing priorities and an overwhelming sense of personal responsibility. You'll discover why clarity disappears when responsibility expands beyond healthy boundaries. How decision fatigue is often fueled by invisible assumptions about what we're actually supposed to be carrying, and why reclaiming focus begins by redefining responsibility itself. Because the solution isn't learning how to carry more, the solution is learning how to distinguish between what is truly yours to carry and what never belonged on your shoulders in the first place. We are also excited to announce that VSP number 3, I Can't Shut It Off, is now officially available. This newest addition to the Vibe Shift Core Problems library takes a deep dive into the hidden drivers behind mental overactivity, chronic vigilance, and the inability to truly disconnect. If you've ever found yourself replaying conversations, anticipating future problems, mentally rehearsing tomorrow's challenges, or feeling like your mind is always on, VSP number 3 was created just for you. The Growing Core Problems Library. VSP number 1 was When Your Mind Pulls You into Fear. VSP number 2 was When Everything Feels Like Too Much. And VSP number 3 is I Can't Shut It Off, is now available. Because awareness is powerful, but transformation accelerates when awareness is paired with a process. Continue the conversation. Read this week's Vibe Shift blog by following the link in the show notes. Because sometimes the path to clarity isn't learning how to manage more, It's discovering what was never yours to carry in the first place. Follow the link and I'll see you over at the VibeShift blog.